Hi there, and welcome to Power Play. I'm Vashi Kapelos in Ottawa on this Thursday. Tonight, 5 projects get the fast track.
We're building big projects for Canadians.
This is pathetic.
I thought finally they get it.
Prime Minister Mark Carney unveils his long-awaited first tranche of major projects to mixed reviews. Will they deliver on his nation-building promise? In moments, the government's point person on energy. Then, Conservative Deputy Leader Melissa Lantsman will be here. Then we've got an all-star front bench to review the Prime Minister's picks. Christy Clark, Marco Mendicino, James Moore, and Monty Solberg will be here to dig into the details coming up. Plus, manhunt for an assassin.
Charlie was a giant of his generation, a champion of liberty, and an inspiration to millions and millions of people.
At this very moment, the gunman who killed U.S. political activist and key Trump ally Charlie Kirk remains at large as political leaders decry yesterday's shocking public assassination. We're going to bring you the very latest on that manhunt coming up. First, though,
The definition of fast has changed dramatically. This country is open for business. We're building big projects for Canadians, for the people behind me, and the union leaders represent people across, good union workers across the country, skilled trade people, our engineers. We are building at scale, at speed, for Canadians for decades.
Prime Minister Mark Carney laying out what he says Canadians will see out of today's first suite of approved major projects, including LNG expansion in British Columbia, an Ontario nuclear plant, and prairie mining. Reaction from the opposition and provincial premiers was swift.
What he's done today is announce that he's going to send an email to an office that isn't even fully staffed up yet. This is pathetic.
When I looked at the first 5 projects, I thought finally they get it, because it's all the projects that have been difficult to build. It's mining projects, it's LNG Canada.
To see our federal government in Canada talk about Manitoba having a potential project of national importance, I don't know if we've had that since Manitoba entered Confederation, or perhaps since the railroads were constructed.
Cory Hogan is the Parliamentary Secretary to Canada's Energy Minister. Hi, Mr. Hogan. Pleasure to welcome you to the show. Thank you very much for making the time.
Oh, absolute pleasure to be here.
I wanted to start off on the first project on this list, LNG Canada Phase 2. Shell, a lead project partner, has not made a decision on whether to go forward with Phase 2. What about today's announcement guarantees they will?
Well, this is exactly why the Prime Minister made the announcement he did today. The whole purpose of the projects of national interest, the whole purpose of the Major Projects Office is to get these major nation-building projects over the finish line, and that in many cases means helping them put together financial packages. In some cases it means helping them get through those regulations. And so, look, there's no guarantees in life, but one of the reasons that this project is on the list is because it's got a high likelihood of proceeding, and this is the nudge that will get it over the finish line.
What gives you the impression that it does have a high likelihood of proceeding? There aren't really a lot of regulatory hoops that need to be jumped through. At this point, it's really an investment decision. Shell has said that they would make that decision a long way from now, in fact, at the end of 2026, and it would depend on comparative investment opportunities. What are you doing to sweeten the pot?
Well, and that's exactly what the Major Project Office will be working through, and the reason it was referred for consideration is to look through what that package might need to be, what might need to be created in order to make sure that this project, which we think could create an awful lot of value for the country, if it works for all parties, it can go forward. And so you're going to see, I think, a number of tools that are put at disposal, including getting through those final regulatory hurdles, for sure. But one of the things the Major Project Office is really about is helping them work through those decisions so that we can get to yes on projects that make sense.
How much of our money is your government willing to put up to see something like this happen? And I ask because Shell and the companies behind LNG Canada certainly are not short on profits. They want money from provincial and federal coffers, for example, to electrify this phase if it did go forward. That's not cheap. Are you willing to put more of our money up? And should you, given how profitable a company like Shell and others in this conglomerate are?
Well, you know, when we talk about financing and funding, there's lots of models there, right? There are loans, there are direct investments from government, there are grants, there are tax regulations that can be eased for these projects where, you know, it's better to get 80% of something than 100% of nothing, as they say. So I don't want to presuppose what the work of the Major Project Office will be on that front, but there are a number of levers that government can pull, and I think one of the things about this office and this announcement is government is signaling intent. We're going to find out how to do that. We're going to get to yes, and certainly we're going to do it in a way that has a positive return on investment for Canada, but these are questions that always come with major projects, and when you're in a world of global capital, you know, you've got to be competitive, and you've got to work with proponents to make sure that their projects are competitive.
This is something, though, that the federal government under the last Prime Minister was considering for a long time. The provincial government in BC has been considering as well. Like, this is a project that actually received its initial approval all the way back in 2015 as a package with Phase 1. What exactly are you telling Canadians tonight will change, other than all of a sudden your government says we want to do more? There's no details you're providing.
No, well, and it's the Major Project Office that'll work through those details, but this is what Bill C-5 did. Bill C-5 created a new set of tools that government can now lever, including the Major Project Office in moving forward. So what we have here is a project that has a very good likelihood of going forward, just needs a bit of a nudge, and you know, now it's over to the Major Project Office under the direction of the Prime Minister to figure out if something can be done.
But I guess I would push back respectfully on that. I don't understand what a nudge means. I think Canadians deserve to know what a nudge means. All that you are saying right now is that it's been placed on a list. Like, I don't know actually how that makes anything more competitive, how that entices Shell, what in principle, you know, your government would do to a profitable company that wants more hard-earned taxpayer money from Canadians. Like, there are no details at all.
Yeah, well, so whenever somebody's making an investment decision, they're going to be weighing return and they're going to be weighing risk. And that's ultimately going to be the calculation that drives whether that investment occurs or not. And we've got a couple of levers we can pull on either side. On return, you can look at making the project more profitable through, you know, some of the various investment decisions we may be able to assist with, maybe coordinate with, maybe you know, tax breaks we can even work with the municipalities in the province on, things of that nature. And on risk, what we've signaled is the risk is low. The risk is low because the government has said this is a project of national interest, and there will be, you know, the reviews will happen in a prompt manner, and they will be shepherded through by the Major Project Office, you know, as this project goes forward through consideration. It's a wonderful project moving forward, and you know, ultimately these things come down to spreadsheets, and that is how these decisions get made, and we want to make sure when those spreadsheets are opened up that the ledgers are telling the story we need them to tell. Good return, low risk.
So let me ask you another question on mitigating that risk, because it's not just like the time that this takes that has been identified by the company as a risk factor. In fact, this company, LNG Canada, and others have identified central policies, for example, what's known as Bill C-69, the impact assessment policy. And in particular, the CEO of LNG Canada told the Globe and Mail that it's the emissions cap that's having an impact on their decision making as well, and the probability or possibility of phase 2. Is your government going to keep the emissions cap in place?
Well, I think that's a question for the Minister of the Environment, but certainly I think one of the things the Major Project Office will do is bring forward some of those impediments, start talking about if there's other ways around them or if there are other changes that need to occur, and get down to business on doing that.
With all due respect, I would argue it's a question for any member of your government. It's a central plank of reducing emissions. It's supposed to be responsible for upwards of 30% of the emissions reductions by 2030. It is a key environmental and energy policy of the federal government. Is your government going to keep it or get rid of it? It's a key risk factor that companies across the energy sector have identified.
Well, I think you're going to be hearing more about climate competitiveness from the Minister of Environment over the fall. One of the things that I want to underline is, while there's been a lot of focus on the Major Projects Office, there's been a lot of work the government's been doing over the summer, and I think you can expect a busy fall of announcements that will be reinforcing some things, shifting on other things, and you're going to have to stay tuned.
I'll rephrase the question. You're an MP from Alberta. I know that you've been around Alberta for a very long time. You understand the interests of the province and the companies there. Do you, in principle, support keeping that emissions cap?
Look, I think that the emissions cap is part of a belt and suspenders approach, right? We've always had the industrial carbon price as the main mechanism here, and the emissions cap was a suggestion of, okay, well, even within that context, we have another way that we might reduce emissions if necessary. So, look, there's more than one way to skin a cat, as they say, and there are a lot of ways that we can meet our climate objectives. I think what you're going to see is some pragmatism going forward. Certainly, I'm an advocate for pragmatism, but that doesn't mean anything is coming, going, or staying. It just means there's a lot of tools and there's a lot of options as we move forward on this stuff.
Respectfully, though, like, what does that mean? Again, I'll sort of push back on this idea that the emissions cap is just a tiny part of the emissions reduction plan. It's simply not. If you look at the Canadian Climate Institute's analysis, it could be equivalent anywhere from like 20 to 30% of the reductions. The previous Environment Minister, Stephen Guilbeault, called it a hallmark of your climate policy. Is it as insignificant as you're making it out to be? And do you in principle support it or not?
Well, I never said it was insignificant. I said there's multiple ways to get there. And we'll be looking at all of those ways to make sure that the Canadian economy is competitive while still meeting our climate objectives in the next bid.
Does that mean that your government hasn't ruled out fully getting rid of any of those policies? And I ask just because C5, in essence, would allow on a project-by-project basis your government to circumvent them, depending on the project. The opposition's challenge and some of industry have come forward saying that's not good enough, we want it all sort of rescinded. Have you not ruled out rescinding any of those marquee climate policies?
But there's a lot that's going to be coming out through the fall. And I think that everything is open for discussion because this is a pragmatic government. But that doesn't mean our overall goals have changed. We are still Liberals. We want to make sure that we're doing our duty on the climate and that we're pushing forward these projects in a responsible way. But yeah, I mean, I think pragmatism is going to rule the day, and we're going to talk to people about how we get there. You know, the oil and gas sector themselves are very seized with the idea of how you can reduce emissions. And I think when you look at some of the other strategies the Prime Minister announced, such as pathways, that opens up a world of opportunities. So you talk about how to reduce emissions in the long term. You talk about, what a cap could or would do or might be affected by. And major projects like that will have a big effect on the calculations.
Just finally, though, I would maybe counter, again, respectfully, the idea that oil companies are seized with that. What they're seized with is getting more taxpayer money to help fund the Pathways project. Is that something that your government is going to do? And should you, again, given the companies comprising the Pathways made record profits last year?
Yeah. They're seized with access to global capital, and they know that the world is shifting. The majority of investment is happening in the renewable space, and they know if they want to be competitive in that world, they need to work on emissions, and certainly all of the oil majors in Calgary understand that. And so it becomes a question about the art of the possible. What can we do? What do we make sure we have to put in place so that we're competitive with other producing jurisdictions? I mean, Canada's in a league of its own in terms of climate protections for an oil-producing jurisdiction. And like I said, there's a lot of levers, there's a lot of pragmatism in this government. We're going to get things built, and we're going to get them built in a responsible way.
Should Pathways take that as a signal that your government is willing to put more taxpayer money in addition to the tax credits that already exist, which I believe amount to more than $8 billion between 2022 and 2030? Like, is there more federal money going to these oil companies?
It doesn't necessarily need to be that. When you look at Pathways and you look at its competitiveness or not, it's really pretty closely tied to industrial carbon pricing. If the cost of carbon is X, well, that's going to be in a balance sheet how much it's going to be worth to build the Pathways project. So working with provinces like Alberta, working with provinces like Saskatchewan, I think we can get some pretty responsible climate policies out there that allow us to be a superpower both in conventional as well as renewable. And it's a great example of how we can be innovative about these things and build whole new industries in the process. You get something like Pathways going, you've also created a Canadian-made carbon sequestration industry that has huge opportunities across the globe.
I will leave it on that note. Mr. Hogan, truly appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure.
That's Cory Hogan. He is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Energy. Let's take a closer look at that list the federal government released. Their focus, they say, on these first 5 projects: LNG Canada expansion in British Columbia, as we were just talking about with Mr. Hogan, the Darlington new nuclear plant in Bowmanville, Ontario, the Contrecoeur terminal container project to expand the Port of Montreal, this copper mine in east central Saskatchewan, and the Red Chris mine expansion in northwest BC. They are also highlighting several projects that they say are under consideration but require, quote unquote, more development. Those include, as you heard referenced in that interview, the Pathways Plus pipeline, in Alberta, a carbon sequestration project, a Port of Churchill Plus in Churchill, Manitoba, and high-speed rail between Toronto and Quebec City. Our front bench tonight with Christy Clark, Marco Mendicino, James Moore, and Monty Solberg will be here a little bit later on to talk about both the policy and the politics behind it. First, though, what is the opposition's take? Deputy Conservative Leader Melissa Lantsman is my guest live. There she is on the other end of a short break. She'll be looking up, I promise. There she is. Back in a moment. Welcome back to Power Play. Just before the break, we spoke with Energy Parliamentary Secretary Cory Hogan from the government on today's major projects announcement, a cornerstone of Prime Minister Mark Carney's economic plan. Let's now get the opposition's take. Melissa Lantsman is the Conservatives' deputy leader, and she's with us live. Hi, Ms. Lantsman. Good to see you again. Thank you so much for making the time.
Good to see you, too.
The leader of your party, Mr. Poilievre, today called the announcement from the Prime Minister, quote, pathetic. Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith said leaders in Ottawa, quote, finally get it. What do you know that she doesn't?
Well, look, I think we've been saying this out loud, and today what we got was a list of projects. We got a list of promises, a list of perhaps things that maybe one day will come to fruition, that list will go to an office that's not yet set up, that doesn't yet have a clear mandate, and Canadians are no better off today. We have 6 months of this Prime Minister who made this a central campaign issue about building the economy, resource development, and standing on our own 2 feet in the face of threats from the U.S. and certainly the trade war that we find ourselves in. And still, we have nothing, no shovels in the ground, no nothing. So I think it's pathetic because it's a list, and that's all it is.
But what's the alternative? I mean, a list is a sort of formalized way of saying, here are the projects we've identified that can move forward the fastest, and we're going to put the weight of the federal government behind them. Like, what inherently is wrong with it, and why do you think it's pathetic, but Danielle Smith thinks it's on the right track?
Well, here's the thing. It's just a list going to an office to one day maybe get approval from this. And frankly, I think that many of those things on the list are already in development, and running a victory lap on theoretical projects is not progress. And I just don't think you can pat yourself on the back today for coming up with a list that goes to an office that's not yet set up yet for one day maybe getting approval. So we're going to stand up to the government, as we have on the issues that we actually think are the problem here. And we've talked about this before. Vashi, it is things like the anti-energy law of Bill C-69. It is the shipping ban off of the West Coast. It is the industrial carbon tax. It is all the things that industry say are in the way that is driving investment out of this country, or at least not attracting it, and driving those dollars to the U.S. As we continue to sell them resources at a discount because we can't even get that part on the list.
And I have a number of questions for you, as I did for Mr. Hogan on those policies. I just want to follow up on the sort of the way in which you're presenting the existence of the list, and make sure that the context that I'm conveying to Canadians and respectfully challenging you with is accurate. It's not that these 5 things need to be approved. Many of them in these instances have been from a regulatory perspective. The issue has been the proponents actually making a decision. And let's take LNG Phase 2, LNG Canada Phase 2, the proponents making a decision to go forward. The signal today that is sent to that proponent is the government will do what it has to do to get that done. Why is that so inherently wrong? If you were in government, you would have to send the same signal too.
Well, the government hasn't said what it's going to do to make these things. They've made grandiose statements on, we are going to do this at a breakneck speed, or I'm paraphrasing, I can't remember, but at a speed at which nobody has seen before. And yet we're 6 months in. After an election that was presented to Canadians as a crisis for our economy, a crisis for our resource development, and this is where we're at. So we've got no shovels in the ground, we've got no investment attracted, and that's exactly what our job is. Our job is to point that out and actually present Canadians with something that is going to remove the barrier that industry has said is a barrier to getting these things done. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're certainly going to oppose what needs to be opposed, and then we're going to present solutions. And that's by way of the Sovereignty Act, which you heard from us quite a bit this summer, which includes getting rid of the red tape and the regulations in the way, which, again, we have talked about many times on this show.
Again, though, even if you were in government, you would have to, those companies still have to make the decision to proceed with that investment. I understand your point that those policies, as I put to Mr. Hogan, the energy industry itself has identified them as standing in the way. But that is what Bill C-5 is supposed to address. A bill, I should mention, that your party supported in the last parliamentary sitting. The idea is that if, let's say, LNG Canada Phase 2 needs it to be that the emissions cap is broken, C-5 allows the government to override that and do exactly that, what will facilitate the company's investment. You keep citing, I remember in previous interviews, Germany, for example, how fast, just 1 second, let me finish. Germany building the LNG terminal as fast as it did. That is the exact law they used, to be able to build that terminal. So why is it okay for them, an example you cite as a positive thing, and not for Canada?
So first of all, these things were profitable before these laws came. So the notion that the notion that there is no proponents or anything like that is can be put to bed. The very thing that you're saying is that the government needs to get rid of these regulations in order for these projects to go forward. They've admitted that. The energy minister from earlier this summer said that he can move some of those regulations out of the way in order to get projects done. And then we hear a minister who's non-committal to getting rid of, let's say, Bill C-69. And others in the cabinet that were there for 10 years saying that they will get rid of C-69. If you need to get these things out of the way in order for the project to go forward, and if you can't say that on national TV to you, then I think we have a problem, and there's a solution to that problem. And the solution is get rid of all of it, get government out of the way so that these projects can proceed quickly, and not for us to have 6 months into the Prime Minister's, after a big crisis election, have him present a list to an office that doesn't have a mandate, that isn't fully staffed yet, and frankly is another layer of bureaucracy to pick and choose winners and losers.
I do understand the point you're making about a lack of specificity where the answers to those questions are concerned, because I'm certainly asking those questions. But what I do garner from what they're saying is that C-5 will act in that way. And you're right to point out that it is a concession or an admission that basically, in order to build those things, that policy can't apply in that instance. But those policies also, in the aggregate, make up a climate policy that will be central to any negotiations, for example, in the future with Europe or other countries that are seized with mitigating the impacts of emissions. And if we abandon them completely, that could hinder our opportunities to diversify our exports in the long term. Why is a middle ground so inherently bad?
Well, I just don't think a middle ground is realistic, and I don't think industry thinks that a middle ground is realistic, and I don't think that attracting investment on this middle ground is realistic. In order for us to attract the investment necessary, to attract the proponents necessary to build these projects, you have to give them a very, very clear signal, a signal that you can build here, that we're open for business. Well, your C-5 is an admission that you may or may not approve a project at a certain point. Do you really think that an industry would look at C-5 as the end-all, be-all of, yes, we are going to dump money in Canada because it's a sure bet? I'm not sure about that, and I don't think many others are sure about that. And that is exactly what we're talking about. If the thing that is in the way is actually in the way, you've admitted it in the way, you've presented new legislation in the House saying that it's in the way, then get out of the way and drop those things in order for us to actually have the development, for us to stand on our own 2 feet, for us to be resilient, and for us to be less dependent on a single customer in the U.S.
Are you willing to alter your position if, for example, LNG Canada does decide to go forward with Phase 2, if there does appear to be a pipeline proponent that comes forward with this regulatory structure that is in place, not with the rescinding of all of those climate policies? Are you willing to admit, if that is the case, that what you're...
No, you're speaking in hypotheticals. The pipeline didn't even make the pipeline didn't even make a list. There isn't even a thought of a list.
There is no pipeline.
Correct.
There is no proponent for a pipeline. Yeah.
Well, there is no proponent for a pipeline because, well, frankly, because there are things in the way for that pipeline. But there is not even a thought of putting a pipeline on a list, and that's precisely because he has the exact same people around him who are anti-pipeline. It is akin to being a vegetarian in a steakhouse. You know that he's there, but he's never going to order anything, and everybody knows that.
Respectfully, one person who said something completely different today is probably the biggest proponent in the country of building pipelines, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. She asked Albertans for patience. She feels that there will be a pipeline on the second or third tranche of these ideas. Again, like, why is that okay, good enough for her? You can't criticize her level of defense of the energy industry. There is probably no more ardent defender of it. Why is it okay for her and not for you?
Well, look, we have a job to do, and we've presented the solution to what I think is the course forward. Danielle Smith has agreed with that on many fronts, on the emissions cap, on C-69, on the tanker ban, on the industrial carbon tax. She's been a steadfast that, and we believe that that's the way forward. That's our job in Parliament as the session comes back on Monday, and she has her own job to do.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note. Look forward to seeing you back in Parliament, Ms. Lantsman. Appreciate you making the time as always.
Take care.
Melissa Lantsman is the Conservatives' deputy leader. You've just heard the government's pitch and the opposition's rebuttal. Our front bench is standing by next to dig into the potential positives and pitfalls ahead. There they are, Christy Clark, Marco Mendicino, James Moore, and Monty Solberg back with us in just a few moments.
These 5 projects will generate more than $60 billion for the Canadian economy and create tens of thousands of high-paying careers. These 5 projects are just the beginning.
He was elected saying that we are in an unprecedented crisis and that we needed to move with unimaginable speed. So what has he done? He's not permitted a single major mine, pipeline, nuclear plant, or anything else. This is pathetic.
I thought finally they get it, because it's all the projects that have been difficult to build. And I would just ask people to be patient. I mean, we went from having chased away, $500 billion worth of investment over the last 10 years. You can't turn that around immediately.
Prime Minister Mark Carney promised to, quote, build, baby, build, and he's now made his first moves to meet that pledge, selecting 5 projects for fast track from his newly minted Major Projects Office and earmarking others for further study. Has he met the mark he set for himself, that being nation-building enterprises to counteract the economic hurt of Trump's second term? Let's bring in the front bench to talk about that. Former BC Premier Christy Clark is here. She's a senior advisor with Bennett Jones. Marco Mendicino is former Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Mark Carney and a former Liberal cabinet minister. Former Conservative Industry Minister James Moore is with us. He's now a policy advisor at Edelman. And former Federal Conservative Cabinet Minister and MP Monty Solberg is here as well. He's the CEO of New West Public Affairs. Hi, everybody. Hello. Great to see you. James, I'll start with you. Wondering, the government is really positioning this as something with enormous promise. The opposition is positioning this as something very vacuous. Where does your analysis fall in that spectrum?
I thought generally today was a good day. I like the way that Don Farrell started the press conference by saying one project, one review for a decision to be made in 1 year and a project to be completed in 2 years. That's a great slogan. It's a great North Star to be focused on for at least these 5 projects. I kind of wonder why that isn't kind of a system-wide approach to all government procurement and infrastructure build. But I think, the Prime Minister stood there for an hour, and what was clear to me was one thing, is that this is a Prime Minister who is owning these 5 projects, and he says there's going to be another tranche coming in November by the time of the Grey Cup. So, traditionally governments, say that, we're the referees of a process, and the process hopefully results in good outcomes, and proponents can come forward, but we kind of are hands off. This is the first time in a long time I've seen a Prime Minister actually say, these specific 5 projects, I want them done. I want to get to yes. I'm going to take ownership. And if they succeed or fail, that's a symbol of whether or not I've succeeded or failed as a Prime Minister. There's a high risk in that politically, but I kind of like the accountability. I like owning the responsibility. I like the drive to get to yes. I'm concerned about some of the projects that were not on the list. We'll see what happens in the second tranche, but I'm more with Danielle Smith in the sense of I think this is a good step forward, good progress. We'll see what the next round looks like.
Marco, can you weigh in on the political risk that James referenced? It seems to me to be enormous, just given the context of the past number of years, the difficulties projects have had going forward, to say, like, and I know these ones are closer to a yes than other ones that could have been selected, but still, it's a lot of ownership and, in my view, political risk. In your view, how much political risk is there?
Sure, I think some risk anytime the Prime Minister takes a podium and says, I want these 5 projects done. And by the way, when you take a look at the play-by portfolio, you're talking about big investments to expand LNG. There's a nuclear SMR play. There's a copper play. There's an exporting through terminal capacity play. So for sure, there's some risk. But I would argue that there's an even greater risk in not proceeding forward and being explicit about the expectations of the government to get big things done. And so by passing Bill C-5 last June, what the government has done, it has set the conditions and signaled to the market that we can and should build big things in this country so that we can be an energy superpower. And that is an extremely important way in which we can gainsay the ongoing uncertainty when it comes to trade around the world.
Monty, I have to get your take on the Alberta factor here, because you know I spent a long time in Alberta covering various premiers. My jaw kind of dropped today at the way in which Danielle Smith responded to this. I understand the logic behind it, but often the politics don't line up with things like that, right? And they haven't necessarily in the past. She was actually asking people for patience when they were questioning the idea of a pipeline not being on the list. How do you think that will play out? And were you at all surprised?
I was surprised, but, I trust Danielle Smith. She's been spending a lot of time talking to the Prime Minister. She's very aware of the 9-year legacy of being let down by Ottawa over and over and over again. She's been a fierce defender for Alberta. So when she says that, Ottawa finally gets it, that carries a lot of weight in Alberta. It tells me that, she has had enough assurances, probably both from industry and from the Prime Minister's office, that there is a path forward. And, I take that as an extraordinarily good sign. Imagine what it would say to the country if the premiers and the Prime Minister all together agreed on a bunch of projects and suddenly they couldn't get them done. I mean, to me, that would be a very bad signal from Canada to the world. Let's hope they can all pull together and finally pull some of these things across the finish line.
Christy, you're the OG on the panel, and I can't even think of how many times you have raised the issue of catalyzing private investment and the issues that we've had in this country with that. This is obviously, to James's point, a decision to put the government at the forefront of that, pushing that. Is that a good thing inherently?
Well, it is in Canada because government has been what's been in the way of all of these projects. And for the last decade, it's been the federal government, Justin Trudeau's government, that stood very firmly in the way. So, on the question of, yes, government has a big role to play because government is ultimately the regulator, and it's government that works to fulfill obligations, court-ordered obligations, like, for example, Indigenous reconciliation and things like that, making sure that we are observing and meeting our environmental commitments, all those things. That's government. Government is potentially a huge problem or a huge help. And I think I would just add this point in terms of the amount of risk that the government is taking with these first 5 projects. They were really smart in choosing these 5 because they're all projects that have been, I think almost all of them, if not all of them, have been under consideration for many years. I mean, my government started building Site C. It finally got completed, and we always envisaged that there would be a transmission line from it to support LNG and natural gas. These are all projects that have been long in the cooker. So I'm going to argue that, yeah, there's some political risk in taking any of this stuff on and putting your name beside it. But my goodness, these projects have been considered and under consideration for many years. I would argue perhaps that the greatest risk to some of these projects could be within the Liberal government itself, with some of the folks that have been there for a long time, have been part of the opposition to natural gas and other big resource projects, and some of them are still there. And if I was Prime Minister Carney, that's what I'd be. I think he should keep an eye over his back shoulder while he's continuing to work on these projects, because I think it's exactly the direction we need to go in.
Well, you reference, I guess, more broadly, besides the kind of personal politics, James, one key sort of, I guess, maybe friction point either within Liberal caucus or between the opposition and the government, and that is these energy and environmental policies like the emissions cap, like the tanker ban, like the impact assessment law that's in place, that C5 on a project-by-project basis will be able to override, but that doesn't get rid of them completely. What is your view on the balance that the government is aiming to strike there? Is it the right one? Will it be politically palatable?
Well, C5 is one obstacle. Duty to consult more broadly is another obstacle. And also, by the way, public opinion. If we take the Prime Minister at sort of his schedule of announcements of these projects, right? 5 projects today. Most of them are already in the first quarter. There's still some delivering to be done on a lot of these projects. But if he does 5 now, 5 in November, 5 in February around the Super Bowl. He was going with the football analogies, fine. So if you imagine 15 projects by the time you get to early spring of next year, not all of those 15 projects are going to be politically really popular or easy. Some of them will hit all kinds of roadblocks. It'll be politically challenging for the government to navigate each of them individually. And if the Prime Minister personally wants to take ownership of them, some of those procurements are going to go sideways. Some of those cost structures are going to go sideways. Some of the financing will go sideways. The Aboriginal relationships could be very difficult. There'll be frankly, some local NIMBY public opinion that might be in a Liberal-held riding that may be really problematic. Christy Clark in BC, we saw that with some, public transit projects in the Lower Mainland. These are really hard. Governments are very good at launching planes into the sky and saying, look at what we've done. It's the landing of the plane that matters. And the delivering of these actual projects, that's what matters. And so, today was a good start, but I think there will be some real challenges ahead. I like the energy, I like the ambition, I like the forward lean, but I think this will be a challenging project, but I hope the country's up for it.
Yeah.
Marco, in your view, what's the key to sticking the landing?
Well, you need a good pilot, and I think the Prime Minister has demonstrated thus far that he certainly has the economic mind to steer us through some of those clouds and some of that uncertainty. But I think that the crucial component here is to execute. And by that, I mean making sure that the government is working closely with industry, that is working closely with rights holders on the ground so that we get these things built. I mean, I know, for example, there was discussion about maintaining our climate objectives. I would point out that the LNG 2 line, if it gets built, certainly we hope that it does, that it will be among the lowest emitting LNG projects around the world. But the second tranche, which is going to come out, hopefully around the Grey Cup. I know that James referred to it, so did the Prime Minister. It's the Grey Cup. It's the Super Bowl, and then it's the World Cup. So he's certainly hoping to make some pace there. But the second tranche, referred to something called Wind West, which is clean energy that's going to come from, we hope, Nova Scotia and the rest of the Maritimes and Atlantic provinces. So it's important not to get pigeonholed into thinking about Bill C5 and major projects in just simply one energy category. It's about creating a portfolio of energy projects so that we can exert that energy dominance both domestically and abroad. And I think we can do that.
To Christy's point, though, Monty, like these projects are, if you were to pick 5 of the lower risk ones politically, they are that. A pipeline in the third tranche is a little bit different. How long do you think, Danielle Smith will continue to offer patience or Albertans more largely?
Well, I mean, if the Prime Minister is making a good faith attempt to drive a pipeline through, I think she'll have lots of time to spend with him and we'll give him some latitude. But it's got to be, that good faith has to continue. Back in whatever year it was when Enbridge was proposing Northern Gateway, we had a pipeline that was pushed for a significant period of time only to have it collapse at the end because of the courts and because the Trudeau government pulled the pin. We can't have that again. I mean, that would cause a rupture between the West and Ottawa that would be almost could unrepairable. So we need to see that good faith continue. We need to see the government keep its focus. They need to find practical solutions for things like labor shortages, which they will surely incur if a bunch of these projects start to move forward. So this is not easy at all. The Premier and the Prime Minister are going to struggle to find answers to some of these very practical challenges.
But on this subject, Christy, and then I wanted to turn to Charlie Kirk. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Just to say, further to Monty's point, not only, though, do they have, is there momentum here, but they also have in British Columbia and Alberta two governments that are highly motivated to distract attention. You've got in Alberta a premier who's up to her neck in scandals at the moment, and in British Columbia they're facing potentially an $18 billion deficit coming up, which would be the highest in the history of the province. Both of them desperately need to land something well. Both of them need to put people to work. They need the tax dollars and the revenue and the economic growth that comes from that. And both of them would like people to remember them for something other than the things that they're being reported on at the moment. So having some cooperative premiers helps a lot.
Fair point. I did want to turn to something that, is dominating headlines in the United States and here in Canada. I think the four of you, given your experience, are well positioned to offer some, reaction at the very least to something that a lot of people are kind of struggling to grapple with, particularly because of the images that came out yesterday, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, who is a very well-known key young organizer for Donald Trump, 31 years old. There is still a manhunt for the killer. We don't have any information from police on the motive, but he was a central political figure in the United States. James, what are your thoughts, or what has been going through your head as you watch that occur and the reaction to it?
The first reaction is a human one. He was a dad. His son just turned 1, his daughter turned 3, and they deserve a dad who's home and loving them and taking care of them, and that's going to be missing. So there's that reaction. But in observing the reactions like you, Vashi, the one thing that I think a lot of people who don't really know the Conservative universe need to maybe appreciate about why there seems to be this reaction around Charlie Kirk in particular. Monty Solberg and I grew up with a lot of Conservative sort of icons, right? George Will, Charles Krauthammer, Jack Kemp, others. If you're a Conservative and you're under the age of 30 in the United States in particular, but in Canada as well, Charlie Kirk was a guy who came along, who went onto university campuses at a time when a lot of young Conservatives felt like they couldn't speak out loud. They were not only not welcome, they were shunned and even sort of chastised and bullied away from campuses from being able to express legitimate views on public policy, whether it's taxes, social policy, defense policy, foreign affairs, and all that. And Charlie Kirk would go onto university campuses and, he would push some buttons and he was, trolling some people a little bit, but he said to Conservatives and a whole cohort of young Canadians or young Conservatives across, certainly the Anglosphere, and he said, you're welcome here. You can speak and you can be proud to be Conservative. It's okay. And you should confront people and be, proud of who you are and what you believe and have a back and forth. And Charlie Kirk lost some debates. He lost some debates at the Oxford Club when he went there. He would lose some debates, but he would get back up and he'd go back onto campus and he would say, Conservatives are welcome here. And when a guy like that on a campus in a red state in Utah gets shot and killed in that awful video, a lot of people who found a lot of confidence in a guy like Charlie Kirk getting murdered, it hit them really hard because he was a guy who they saw as a guy who opened doors for them to be proud to be Conservative again. And so for them, this is a very emotional thing. And I think a lot of people don't understand that Conservative mindset. And I think it's important that as we aspire to empathize with people who are going through some trauma, for young Conservatives, he was a really important figure.
Your thoughts on that, Monty?
Yeah, I completely agree. It's important, I think, for leaders everywhere to learn from this, temper their rhetoric. I think it's important to see the social media platforms step up and ensure that rhetoric stays within bounds on their platforms as well. We can't continue to see this happen. It's just shocking when political figures, especially in the U.S., not just Charlie Kirk, but many others, are attacked and in some cases killed. It's just gone way too far.
Marco, your thoughts on what occurred in sort of more generally political violence right now?
Well, Thomas Jefferson is quoted as saying, death makes us all equal and it should make us forgiving as well. And I can't begin to imagine, I don't think anybody can, the agony that his wife and his children and his family and his friends are going through right now, but I think we should try. And I think those of us who are still in elected politics especially should try to empathize and muster the sense of decency and grace and patience and forgiveness because, we have the benefit of living in a democracy. And, we come on, we do these panels and sometimes, we disagree, often vigorously. That's healthy. But, it should never go beyond words. And I don't wish ill will or harm towards anybody that I disagree with. And so having experienced this personally, and I know many of my colleagues have as well, hard to say much beyond that.
Christy, last word to you.
The thing that I hope his kids and all of us remember about Charlie Kirk, is that he loved debate. He wanted to engage in an exchange of ideas. He was not trying to shut down debate. He wasn't trying to yell at people. He wasn't trying to humiliate people or insult them. He offered to go to places all over America and say, give me your best possible debate. Fight me, oppose me. But his whole thing was, let's talk. And we don't have enough of that in politics, especially in the United States. And I think that's the thing that I'll always remember about him, is his contribution to the value of free public dialogue in a civilized debate.
I'm going to leave it on that note. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate you making time for the discussion. Christy Clark, Marco Mendocino, James Moore, and Monty Solberg, our front bench, and we will be back in just a moment.
This is unequivocally a tragedy. Regardless of a person's politics, I hope all members of Parliament from all parties would be willing to condemn political violence. What I'm thinking of right now is children who are going to grow up without their dad.
We must all unite, regardless of our political views, around a simple principle. Political violence is never acceptable. Every person should be free to express their opinion without fear of violence.
Justice Minister Sean Fraser and Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre there on the assassination of influential political activist Charlie Kirk. At this hour, a massive manhunt is still underway for the gunman who shot and killed Kirk in broad daylight at a Utah university Wednesday.
Now, I understand there are a lot of questions about motive. I assure you that all leads, tips are being fully investigated. As of this morning, we have received more than 130 tips. We thank the community for that. The FBI has brought every resource to bear, and we will continue to do so throughout the course of this investigation.
Earlier, the FBI in Salt Lake City released these two images of someone they describe as a person of interest wearing a black shirt with an American flag on the chest, sunglasses, and a baseball cap, asking the public for help. This morning, investigators said they had found a bolt-action rifle they believe was used as the murder weapon. Police believe the suspected shooter fled into a nearby neighborhood after firing one shot. We will, of course, continue to bring you any updates in that manhunt as they become available to us. We'll take a quick break. We're back with more. Our takeaway tonight on Power Play comes from our top story, the Prime Minister's decision to greenlight 5 projects he says he wants to fast-track, a key irritant between the opposition and some aspects of industry and the federal government has been some of the climate policies that are in place. We spoke earlier to the parliamentary secretary, to the energy minister, who seemed to indicate that getting rid of some of those policies was not entirely off the table, but that a climate-related announcement would be coming in the next few weeks to provide some definition. I will leave our program Power Play there. I'm Vashti Capellas. Thanks for watching.